Morning, everybody. Look at that nice haircut. Did it myself. I'm sure that's not hard to believe. How's everybody doing this morning? Good morning, good morning. Happy Monday. The start of another week, which means that we're 1 week closer to spring. We're one week closer to summer. Good morning, Mom. We're hopefully 1 week closer to getting our freedom back, beating the virus. I want nothing more than we've already canceled 2 family trips, not necessarily vacations, but we had a family trip planned to go to Kalahari for Maya's cheer competition, something they talked about for months. They actually, I believe, had to compete and win an opportunity to be in that. So that's sad. I think we already canceled one Disney trip. So anyway, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it is what it is. We're just going to manage the situation the best that we can and come out the other side. But man, I first of all, I loved the 2 episodes last night. ESPN does a great job of producing those. Yesterday, it was really cool to see the story around Dennis Rodman, which is part of what I want to talk about today. And then I think they taught us an important lesson about leadership yesterday and how Michael Jordan went from being the best player in the world, which he already was when this happened. He was already the best player in the world when they were losing to the Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals. And he went to being the best teammate in the world, the best leader in the world as far as basketball is concerned. And, you know, it really happened when I think there was a natural evolution for him as a player after losing some critical playoff games, which he did not take lightly. And again, it's been said, and I believe it to be true, that we learn more in losses than we do in victory. And the one super valuable thing, and I talked about this before, is that 10 years of experience doesn't necessarily equate 10 years worth of experience. And I think what you learned from Michael Jordan yesterday is each year that he lost in those playoffs, he reflected and had enough insight to learn from it and took personal responsibility. And you can see that multiple times throughout even just yesterday's episodes, where he was, insightful enough to reflect back and say, what could I have done differently? What can I do better to help get my team to that next level? Because his goal was to, A, to get to the playoffs every year, and then B, he didn't want to just get to the playoffs, he wanted to win a championship. At one point, that required him to involve his teammates. And someone said yesterday he was selfish. I don't think that he was selfish prior to this. Frankly, the best shot for him to take every time down the floor, the best shot that those teams that he played on was him. It wasn't until they had started to put some pieces around Jordan where that triangle offense that Phil Jackson believed in was able to be effective. And what happened with Jordan is he trusted his teammates, and they talked about it yesterday, but he trusted his teammates enough to take the shot. Good morning, Chris. What's up, brother? And the shot doesn't always mean the final shot, the game-winning shot. It means if you trust your team to do the right thing and step up when the situation calls for it, now the other team has to defend all 5 players, not just one player. And that was the one thing I think that Jordan had learned from losing those Eastern Conference Finals to the Pistons is they made their primary focus on defense, stopping Jordan. And no matter how great he played, he single-handedly couldn't beat another team. And when you think about that from a leadership perspective, and whatever team that you're on, whether it's at work or you play on a team or you're the leader of a team or the coach of a team or you have a position within a team, is that trust is super important. And that trust came from a level of accountability. I mean, there was accountability in practice every day with Jordan, where he competed at the same level in practice that he competed at in a game. So when the game time came, he could trust those players to take those shots because they had done it in practice over and over and over and over again and had continually made the shot. And if you look at the one particular instance they use, is that one game, Paxson, who was, a lifetime role player, a very good basketball player, but never the star. And in that particular game or that series, he led them to, a big win. And it's a lesson that you can learn from one of the greatest of all times in Michael Jordan, that when he really made the position from one of the great players of all times to just one of the greatest icons of all time, is when he started to hold his teammates accountable, right? Like there was no let up. If you had an expectation and you had a role, he was going to hold you accountable to do what you had already agreed to do, right? By signing your contract, by going through practice and having conversations about who does what, and what level you're expected to play. I mean, it was clear that when you played with Michael Jordan, you were to give the maximum effort every game, every minute of every game. Good morning, Dad. How are you? And as he started to trust his teammates and his teammates trusted him, that's really where they became a team, started picking each up off the floor. Right after they lost the Eastern Conference Final that one year, the next morning it shows them back in the gym, lifting weights and working out. Michael Jordan, again, already the best player in the world, knew that to get to that next level, he had to develop his body. He took such a beating in those Detroit Pistons series because they made the decision, wisely enough, that anytime he came in the paint, he was going to be sent to the floor. They would foul him or get to him physically before he could ever leave the ground, because they realized that once he left the ground, he was virtually unstoppable. And what he had to do is physically to be able to develop his body till then he could not only, take that type of physical grueling beating, that he then wanted to be the person that would physically hand out the beatings. And if you watch as they developed as a team, he developed his body, they collectively became tougher, and the next season or 2 seasons later, they swept the Pistons 4-0. I mean, this was back-to-back national world champions that they then swept in the Eastern Conference Finals 4-0. So again, the next is once you've reached the point of being a great player, the next step for you is then to develop the team around you. And the biggest lesson for me yesterday is how much trust is required to be able to do that. And he trusted his teammates. And my point would be is that the offense that they ran allowed all of those other people to play a part. It allowed them an opportunity to take the shot. It allowed them the opportunity to, in instances, be the leader. It allowed them the opportunity to be unselfish. It allowed them the opportunity to collectively work together, rather than having 4 guys standing around watching the star or the leader do his thing. So the lesson there should be, make sure that your team, whether it's a sports, group or a team at work, 2 things you should take from that. You need to develop trust, and you need to give everybody a chance to take the shot. And that just means, giving people a regular opportunity to speak up, a regular opportunity to present new ideas, a regular opportunity to give feedback on existing processes and existing ways of doing business, to make sure that you're getting the most out of your team. Otherwise, you'll never get any farther, which you saw in that movie or that episode. You'll never get further than your best player. And when you're playing a team sport, you just cannot win when it's 5-on-1. So the second thing that I learned from there, which is, I think, and if you missed it, I would encourage you to go back and watch it, is that Dennis Rodman, obviously a super, 2 things, a super athlete and just an overall sports figure. I mean, the amount of effort that he brought and the intensity that he brought to the court as I don't think to this day has been matched. And what made him that intense and what gave him that motor on the court also made him extremely unique as a person. Whatever it was in his brain that gave him the ability to push his body and develop, a skill that again, as far as rebounding, he's the best of all time. He is the best rebounder, which is a really important part of the game, of all time. He made a decision that was going to be his lane, and then he decided to work on it. Focus is a very important part of developing ourselves. If we focus on everything, we focus on nothing. He scored 28 points a game in college. When he came to the NBA, he saw that his scoring was not going to translate. And the one thing that he thought and again, this guy's 6'7". He's not a huge guy. And this is back in the NBA when like everybody had multiple 7-footers. Like having 7-footers in a dominant center was part of the game. And he was out rebounding all of these 7-footers. And if you watch most of these plays, he's tipping the ball 3-4 times. He studied, how each person shot and how he anticipated the ball to come off the rim. That's a unique person. That work ethic, that intensity, is very unique. And up to that point, everybody had expected him to be that person on the court, but then like everybody else off the court, which he was not. And if you look, he went through a couple, bad phases or bad patches with teams where ultimately, when you look back on it, they tried to fit him into this box. And I'm not, condoning some of his behavior. I mean, it's speculated that, he was into drugs and alcohol and all kinds of stuff. Now, in the NBA, as a professional athlete, when you make millions of dollars, there's a time and a place for that, and it may be more, regularly accepted than it would be if you work at the local bank branch. At that point, we're not talking about a guy that's intended to be a role model. So my point would be is that Phil Jackson called him into his office, and Rodman came to him and wanted a 48-hour vacation. At some point, Rodman was just burned out. He was, probably traveling so much and had to be in the hotels at a certain time and be at warm-ups at sorry, cut out there. But he was living the life that everybody else had decided for him. He had to be at a certain place at a certain time, in bed at a certain time. He wasn't able to go out and openly express himself and go to nightclubs and party and dance and do all of that stuff. And that was part of who he was. And Phil Jackson was insightful enough to know that he had to consider at that point, and he brought Michael Jordan in to help him make what at that point was a difficult decision. And Jordan was like, no way. If you let this guy go, he's never coming back. Phil Jackson saw it one layer deeper and knew that it was inevitable that he wasn't going to continue to give forth the effort that he was giving or be a contributing member of the team if he wasn't able to step outside of that box for a period of time and go be himself and let loose. And my point would be is that you cannot treat all of the members of your team the same. They all have different motivations. They all have different goals. They all have different whys. They all have different family situations. They all have different financial situations. You have to be able to understand that every team has a Rodman, maybe not as drastic or doesn't stick out the way that he did, right? Like he made it clear that he was different with his hairstyle and tattoos and piercings. But you have, whether you know it or not right now, everybody has a version of Dennis Rodman. And you need to make sure that you understand the unique set of circumstances that your people on your team work with so that you can pour into them. And all Phil Jackson had to do at that point was be understanding enough that 48 hours, they let Rodman go run wild in Vegas, they necessarily didn't miss. Would it have been nice to have him at that period of time to be in team practices and conditioning and all that stuff? Absolutely. But what they got back from him was 10 times whatever they sacrificed, and he then developed a friendship and a relationship with his coach and his teammates that was unprecedented. For a guy that was never able to connect with teammates, that never felt like he was understood, that was constantly rebelling against his team and his coaches and the officials and the league, he now, I think at some point they considered him and Phil to be best friends. And if you think about it, those two guys at that point in their life could not been, more. Phil's a very soft-spoken, flies under the radar, makes more of an impact with his mind than he does his mouth and his body. Where Rodman was quite the opposite. It was bold and very outspoken and very energetic. But those two who were essentially complete opposites developed a trust for each other because of just what they were able to give to the other person and what they got in return. So the key for Phil Jackson and those Bulls was they allowed Rodman to be off the chain a little bit. They allowed him to go out and be who you got to remember, the guy played with an intensity and a motor on the court that has never been matched. No one has ever brought that type of intensity and effort to loose balls in the middle of a 25-point game or what seems to be a meaningless ball that's dribbling out of bounds. He was constantly diving into the bleachers. Now it happens and it's a highlight. He did it 5, 6, 7 times a game. So you have to understand that the mentality of that person that gives him the heart to go that hard on the court doesn't just disappear when he leaves the court. He needs to go hard. And they let him go hard. It's not like he was out there breaking the law or hurting anybody. And by understanding who he was and allowing him to be himself and embracing that, that uniqueness that he had, they developed a relationship with Dennis Rodman, that was unheard of. He had bounced around from a couple teams and nobody could effectively control him. Well, Phil didn't try and control him. He just tried to understand him. And then once he understood him, he poured into him. He didn't try and pull back or give him all these restrictions. He gave the guy some freedoms and let him know that he understood where he was coming from and told him it was okay to be himself. And it worked. Again, we're watching the documentary about one of the greatest teams of all time. And I say that teams, like it's centered around Michael Jordan, but there are so many lessons if you pay attention to what's going on there. And the one that I'm talking about now is the insight that Phil Jackson had. Think about that. Even today, if you had someone that was given a 48-hour hiatus during the season to go party in Vegas, you would catch so much flack and criticism for that. And again, is it right for every person? I don't know. But I think he understood enough about Dennis Rodman and treated him, as an individual, although he was a member of the team. He gave him the ability to be himself, and who he was off the floor is what allowed him to be as dominant as he was on the court. And they wanted that dominance. They wanted that chemistry. They wanted him to run through a brick wall for his teammates. And once he knew that they were willing to let him be himself, never again did anybody ever have to question Rodman's, heart. So Phil Jackson's ability to understand that although he had a team, made up of 15 individuals, that collectively wore the same uniform, they're supposed to operate as a team, they all need to be moving in the same direction. He understood well enough that at that point, Dennis Rodman could not be treated like everybody else. He had to allow him some freedoms and some flexibility in order for him to be understood, in order for him to feel appreciated. And once they gave that to Rodman, he gave it back 10 times. So the two lessons for you are to make sure that your primary role, no matter what your position is within the company, is to do your job, but your job at some point should be to give to all of your other teammates. And again, if you look back at all of the greatest leaders of all time, I think you'll find traces of this all over their track record. So give to your teammates and develop your teammates, hold them accountable. Accountability too often gets, a negative connotation to it. I don't think that there's anything wrong with me, holding you accountable to do what you said you were going to do. Matter of fact, most people enjoy having accountability. It keeps us pushing. It keeps us focused. It keeps us on track. And then the second thing is to make sure that you get to know the people that you work with, get to know the people that you lead, and show a sincere interest in them. Not just what they give to the company or what they add to the bottom line. Get to know who they are. And once you're able to lead and connect with those people on an individual basis, it creates, I think, a trust, a layer of accountability, and a loyalty that separates the difference between good and great. So that was my takeaway from yesterday's The Last Dance with Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. I hope everybody has a great day and a great week, and I'll see you soon.